series. I'm Kinkini Banerjee, the Senior Coalitions Relations Manager at USBC, and I'm so glad to have you join us for this session. This Part 2 series is organized as part of USBC's training, technical assistance, and capacity building support for our network of state, territorial, tribal, and community breastfeeding coalitions across the U.S., as well as for our network of member organizations. The access is free and open to all interested coalition leaders or anyone involved in forming or leading a nonprofit organization in the breastfeeding field. All of these webinars are free, and the announcements are sent through the USBC's coalition announcement list. This series occurs on the third Wednesday of odd-numbered months from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And the details and registration info is posted a couple of weeks before each session. And you can also download the slides for today's session, as well as check out the archives of previous sessions at www.usbreastfeeding.org/power-tools. And as you know, to streamline access, these webinars have been set up as a series. So once you've registered for them, you're automatically registered for every session in the series, and you'll get a reminder or you'll receive auto reminders for these sessions as well. We understand that you can't attend these sessions live, so you will be able to access the recording. And as I said, the archives for our past sessions are either in your confirmation reminder emails that you will be getting, or you could also go to the website, to the Power Tools page. And I'll show you how you do it. If you go to our website, www.usbreastfeeding.org, scroll along the tabs at the top, and the extreme right one is Coalitions. Click on that, and you'll see all the 4 series that we have, and the Power Tools is right there. So this is one of 4 of our series. And today's session, because we have a large number of attendees, you are in listen-only mode, but this session is really dedicated to answering your questions. So please submit your questions at any time during the webinar, and type your questions into the question box. So on your right-hand side of your screen, you should see a control panel. If you don't see it, it might be minimized. So just click on that orange arrow tab, and it'll pop back out. Scroll down, just under the audio is the tab for questions. Click on it, and it'll open up a box for you to type in. And so again, like I said, don't wait until the end of the presentation. Our team will be addressing different topics, and especially if you have a question on a topic as it's being discussed, send us your question immediately, and we will answer that in real time. If you have any tech problems, audio issues, please send an email to coalitions@usbreastfeeding.org, and our staff should be able to help you. Wonderful, and that brings me to today's topic. Ask the USBC team your burning questions on coalition operational effectiveness. So thank you. We sent you an announcement a week ago, and thanks for all the questions that have come in. The team will be answering questions about coalition management and operations, and sharing best practices for building a stronger, more effective coalition. We'll be discussing topics such as managing volunteers. For greater coalition impact today, we'll be discussing strengthening our governance practices, building strong communications, exploring fundraising ideas, improving our social media capacity. So there's lots of things on many different issues that we hope you'll find useful. And I'm thrilled to introduce our staff team. This is the USBC staff team that you see. Megan Renner is our Executive Director, Amelia Pismite, our Deputy Director, Cheryl Lebedovich, Workplace Program and Campaign Manager, Camille Abbey is our Meeting and Conference Manager, Danae Hartfield is our Senior Coalitions Relations Coordinator, Lynette Anvilika Enigbo is our PR and Communications Coordinator, and Sarah is our Program and Campaign Coordinator. I am Kinkini, of course, and all of us will be on the call today and answering your questions. So with that, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our first question. Okay, this one came to us about how do small volunteer-based state coalitions engage all their members to participate in the activities and get projects done. Our board currently does much of the legwork of the organization. It can be overwhelming, and we run the risk of burnout. Please help. I'm going to turn this one over to Megan.
Great, thanks, Kinkini. And you could jump forward a slide here. Hi, everyone. Kinkini very astutely chose this one to be the first in the lineup today because we can really talk about a lot of different components here. So we hope we start to stimulate some other follow-on questions and such with this one, and Danae's going to actually join me in this response. It might be the longest one of the webinar, but we hope it will be stimulating. So we're going to talk about sort of two different aspects to this, which is a really common, how do we deal with this volunteer management, volunteer burnout situation, and I can tell you after all of my years at the USBC, we still struggle with this with both staff and volunteers. So we're going to talk both about, how are you making decisions in your coalition about what to do, what projects and activities you're taking on, as well as the approaches, the methods that you approach how to do that work. But first, I also just wanted to acknowledge that burnout is real, and I have a few links here that I won't talk about very much here, but you might want to take a glance at them. Even just Googling nonprofit burnout, you'll find all sorts of interesting, perspectives, blog posts, articles, different folks that might have suggestions that could be helpful to you. Every nonprofit is different, and there's different ways to address that, and just a couple of the ones that I really liked included, how you recruit volunteers, how you set their expectations, project management. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the how. Communication is really key, of course, and recognition, and how do we recognize and award and thank our volunteers. So don't want to overlook the fact that burnout is very real, especially in the nonprofit sector, and it can impact both the staff and the volunteers. It doesn't matter if you're getting paid, you can still experience burnout, and that can be a real sticky wicket. So if we go to the next slide, Kinkini, I'll chat a little bit about that decision process, about how are you making decisions about what activities and projects, initiatives your coalition is going to pursue, and especially how are you ensuring that those decisions are aligned with your current capacity of your coalition. And just a few things to think about here includes whether you decide to pursue, and how do you decide that you can pursue an unfunded project. Just as one example, one of the things that we went through in many iterations of trying to deal with this issue in USBC's history, it was that when we would have a new project idea that would come up, that first we would have our group of volunteers write a funding proposal for it. And we tried that for a little while. It was an interesting and helpful approach. And then we had this stable of funding proposals available that we could bring forward as different potential funders arose on our radar. But even if you don't go that route, I think there are some special considerations and parameters about how do you decide that you can do start up something new, have a new activity when there isn't explicit funding for it, and oftentimes in volunteer-based organizations that does happen, and it's just something to be very intentional about and to make sure that you are really aware of what that means and how it will be sustained over time. Another really common theme that I see here is this idea of the individual passion projects. You might have volunteers come into your organization who are really excited and energized about their pet project, their thing that they want to do, and oftentimes volunteer-based nonprofits can say, great, okay, go and do it. And then sometimes what can happen is you end up with, 6 or 7 different pet projects running around, and you end up having more coordination work to do with your leadership than you anticipated in terms of helping those projects to pursue. So even though you might have a really committed, dedicated volunteer leader for that project, they're still going to come back and need the support of the board or the staff at different points along their journey, and sometimes that can also lead to overwhelm and burnout, and sometimes the board just has, is playing whack-a-mole, has too many things that they're going on trying to oversee. So that's where, this thought of sometimes even when you have a lot of volunteer doers who are really committed, you still need to make sure you have enough central coordinating capacity, whether that is within your board if you don't have paid staff, or as your nonprofit or your coalition gets more advanced and does have paid staff capacity, sometimes that coordination role will shift over into a paid position. So it's something else to be aware of, and again, to just be really intentional about making sure there's that coordination capacity as well as the doing capacity, the implementing capacity. So a couple things to think about there. But then bigger picture, do you have a strategic plan or a strategic framework for your coalition? And there are some varying ways that you can make use of that plan. We could go into a whole 2-day workshop about strategic planning, so I'm not going to do that here. We did do a workshop at the conference last year on strategic planning, and so if you're getting ready to embark on that process, please reach out to us and we can get you some different resources from that. But a couple of questions again to think about. One big thing I always ask is your coalition strategic plan differentiated from your state breastfeeding blueprint? Or sometimes they're called different things. I know here in Illinois we call it the blueprint. Nationally it's now called the Surgeon General's Call to Action. But I think it's really important that you don't consider those to be one and the same, that you really need to have, as a coalition, a distinct and separate plan, and not assume that your plan for your state is the same thing. Of course, there's a lot of alignment. Of course, you are a key player in implementing that blueprint for the state, but you need to have your own plan that meets your own needs as a coalition in your stage of development. So then this is something that was also an error that USBC made in our early phase, where way back in the day we worked on this national action plan for breastfeeding, and then we used it as our strategic plan for a while before we realized, gosh, okay, this isn't addressing our own capacity needs. So that leads me to the second bullet here of, does your strategic plan have an explicit goal around building your coalition capacity, your infrastructure piece? And that doesn't have to mean staff. Capacity can also mean things like your governing practices, your financial management, your fundraising, and how you have time and dedicated capacity to fundraising to grow in the future. So all of those things, they need and deserve their own goal, their own area of your plan. And then lastly, how often do you revisit the plan? It's really common that nonprofits will make a plan, it'll be for 3 or 5 years, and they'll have it and they'll refer back to it, maybe once a year. But sometimes we even forget about it, and we don't we get really caught up in the day-to-day implementation of activities, and we have left it aside. So one other really helpful thing to do when you're facing a period of burnout and overwhelm is take a step back, do a taking stock of meeting, whether it's your board or your membership or both, and take another look at that plan. It might be that maybe you don't need to be pursuing all of the parts of the plan at once. You don't have to be all things to all people every single day. Maybe this year you want to just pick one of the priority areas, or think about setting some shorter-term priorities or goals within the longer-term strategic plan that have some quick wins, some shorter-term achievements that you can reach to, and know that you are not overtaxing your current capacity. So those are a few things to think about. But again, if you're getting ready to embark on planning, let us know. A couple other bits about what you do and how you decide about your projects. We have a tool that we've been piloting in USBC called the Idea Mapping tool. And this is really thinking about, for every project idea that comes in, whether it's somebody's pet project or whether it's something that has been talked about for many, many years amongst dozens of people in your coalition, there's this consideration of who is it that needs to take action to implement this idea. Sometimes it could be that individual organizations need to take action. Maybe it's that individual doctors' offices in your state would be changing their own internal practices around breastfeeding. Sometimes it's that a group of organizations needs to come together and implement a project together, and sometimes we see that happening with maternity care practice learning collaboratives. Sometimes it's that policymakers need to take action to pass a law or change a policy or regulation. So first of all, we think about that, and then we want to make sure that your approach is aligned. So one of the most frustrating things is when we are trying to hammer a nail with a screwdriver. We want to make sure that the approach that you are taking is aligned with that. Who needs to act and what sort of thing are they doing? And really quickly, high-level questions to think about are there other organizations that could be engaged, that should be engaged in this particular project? And even sometimes, do they have capacity to share with the effort? And you may not be going in to meet them with that second question in mind. You might just be going in to introduce yourself and have a discussion about if they're interested in that area. But oftentimes, especially with so much interest in breastfeeding right now, they will come along very willingly and might be interested in working together. And that has been sometimes the most fruitful collaborations that we've experienced at USBC. So if you flip to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Danae here in a second, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the how you go about your project work. And she's going to share about a couple of infrastructure supports that we have at USBC for coalitions. The first being the coalition community workspaces within the USBC website. And Danae is really our extraordinaire coordinator of providing the free setup and training and tech support that we offer to the coalitions on using these tools. And then she's also going to do a little bit of a demo of the Surgeon General's Call to Action Directory, which is a public-facing resource on the site. And we really want to encourage all of you and everyone in the USBC membership as well that before you embark on a new project or a new activity, to come to this Action Directory and look for examples. We want to avoid reinvention of the wheel as much as possible, and this can really be a great resource so that you can build on the work of others who might have come before you in a particular project area. So over to you, Danae, for the how.
Thank you, Megan. So I am Danae Hartfield. I am the Senior Coalitions Relations Coordinator, and today I'm just going to talk to you about two really great resources that we provide within the USBC site. So the first one is the Coalition Community Workspaces. Every state and territorial breastfeeding coalition has had a community workspace created for them within the USBC site, and every workspace is equipped with tools for interaction within the coalition, and these tools are all free of charge. So this space is meant for internal collaboration and communication to and between members, file archiving, and sharing. So I just want to show you a quick screenshot of what a community workspace looks like. This is the community workspace for the Texas Breastfeeding Coalition. And I just want to go over a few of the tools that we provide for you. So the first tool that we provide to coalitions are forums. And these forums really operate as listservs within the USBC site. We start each community off with an announcement forum, which is generally used by coalition leaders to send out official coalition news and updates, and a discussion forum for coalition members to communicate and share resources. The great thing about these forums is that they do operate as listservs, so each of them has a unique email address provided. So that means that you can email outside of the website. So you can use Google and Outlook, and all of your emails will be archived here within this space. Again, these are just the two that we start you off with. We can certainly add more forums to this space if you'd like. The second tool we have for you are file libraries, which we start each community off with 3 file libraries for archiving meeting materials and project documents. And there's even a public library accessible for you to post to, and that's really something you would use if you'd like to share something with the field. So this is a great place to log all of your projects and your documents for your coalition, and it's accessible to all of your members. We also provide you with a roster, so if you need to contact anyone within your membership and you can't seem to find their contact information, the roster is available as well. The next tool we provide within this space is a calendar. And a community calendar is useful for coalition events such as your meetings or annual summits. And within this calendar, you can set up automated reminders to be sent out to all of your coalition members. There's also a really great tool, the Quick Links tool, to add any useful links for your members. So that includes any external web pages such as your coalition's website, and any pages within the USBC site as well that you find resourceful for your coalition members. So if your coalition is interested in using its state's community workspace and would like training, please feel free to contact me to set up a time, and we can work through some of these resources in more detail. So the next great resource that Megan mentioned is the Surgeon General's Call to Action Directory, which showcases organizations' activities on a special page for each of the Surgeon General's 20 actions. And what I'm going to do now is just jump into the website and give you a little overview of one of the pages. Okay. So this is the action page for Action 14, which focuses on workplace support. And each page has the implementation strategies so that you can review what was actually in that call to action. And then we also provide USBC resources. The page also has national and state and local community activities populated onto it. So each of these organizations have entered their activity descriptions and project links and their contact information into their group profile. And this allows that information to be populated onto the page. So if your coalition is looking to start a project under a specific action area and not wanting to reinvent the wheel, this is a really great place to get ideas and even contact the states that have already worked on projects under that specific action. Again, these action pages are public, which means you don't have to log in to view them, and it's a really great place to not only showcase your state's work, but to also get a snapshot of what's going on at the national, state, and local level. So if your coalition hasn't filled in its activity descriptions, please go ahead and do that, and we love to have your work displayed on the site. And I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
Great. I think we are set with this one. Kenny, if you'd like to take back the control, but I do see we have one question in the interim that I can answer really quick, which is, where is this idea mapping tool that I was mentioning? And I'll tell you, I was just about to put it into the slide, but we're making some final tweaks to it. As I said, we had been piloting it and have applied some learning from both our national constellations focused on breastfeeding, as well as some of the experiences that we've had with the NAPS coalition, the National Safe Sleep Coalition that we are connected to. So it's been a really robust process of testing it out and trying trying some different approaches. So I think we are very near republishing a revised version, and what we can do is post it also into the handouts for this webinar as well. So we'll do that and make sure it gets out to everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Megan. And moving on to our second question, and this is also from our coalitions in the Southwest. It says, we want to start publishing a monthly e-newsletter for our constituents on our large list. So what resources and suggestions could you provide us to start and sustain this ambitious plan? And there was also another question that came in later about some internal communications as well, so external, internal as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Lebedevich, our workplace program and campaign manager. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Hi there, my name is Cheryl. Thanks so much, Kinkini. So I really think this is a great question, and one of the things that I want to say before I even dive into it is this bit about sustainability. So it's a release a newsletter. It's a really great opportunity to showcase what's going on, make sure folks are connected with the work happening, but it's important to keep in mind that you can build it in a way that is sustainable for you. So there's I'm going to kind of walk through the process that we took with USBC, but just keep in mind that there's so much flexibility, and it can be whatever you make of it. So if you move to the getting started slide, Kinkini, the first bullet on here is to sign up for all of the relevant state, local, or even national newsletters and blogs. So you're going to want to think about what state or local agencies are focusing on implementing the policies and practices that you're interested in influencing? What are the other organizations in your area that are working on these issues? Who is funding all of these issues? Really, you want to think through who you might be interested in learning about and sign up and subscribe for all of their newsletters. It's going to be free. It's going to be easy. And the benefit of doing this as the very first step is that as those subscriptions arrive in your inbox, you're going to be able to see and experience all different sorts of formats that you can consider for your own newsletter. So you're going, if you sign up for 30 or 40 different newsletters, you're going to really see, that really is overkill for our group. This is a really nice example. I like the way this is set up or organized, whatever that is. So it's a really great place to start to kind of assess. Sometimes you don't know what you want until you see it in front of you. And of course, the other really important part about this is that you're going to now have a steady stream of content that you could consider for not only your own coalition's work and having that knowledge yourself, but it has content for your newsletter. Now, when the USBC started doing this process, I was actually nervous to tell people that it was the strategy because it just seemed too simple. I thought, surely there is a more advanced, technologically savvy way to do this. But really, here we are several years later, and this is really the main means through which we gather our information too. So I definitely recommend it. The process of identifying who you might want to follow, what sort of communications they have and how you can get plugged into it, sort of brainstorming, what are the local foundations, what are the initiatives happening that we're interested in and want to know about. That is, it's a little bit more time consuming than you might expect. A lot of times you might find one organization and it's going to uncover all these others that you might be interested in. So one of the things that I think is important to emphasize is this is a great project for like a summer intern to do. It's not something that you necessarily need to lay on to the long to-do list of your leadership team already. And going with Megan and Danae's theme about not reinventing the wheel, the other thing is So as you're signing up for newsletters and thinking about what might work for you, I want to be really clear that you should always, always, always feel welcome to borrow from the USBC e-newsletter, our publication. So the content is there, it's recyclable, you know, even the way we have it organized could be another example. No need to you know, come up with your own thing if this would meet your needs. Let's see, moving into the next question, or the next slide on curating content. So I wanted to dig in a little bit to how we use all of these newsletter subscriptions to curate the content that goes into the communications that you all are so familiar with receiving from USBC. So the way this works is actually the entire USBC team is involved. So we have an online form we've created where every staff member is able to submit items that come up in their news feed on Facebook or to their inbox through their newsletter subscriptions. And we can make sure that we're capturing everything that's going on into one place. Now, we have an online form, but that's certainly not necessary. I mean, in the early days of USBC, our system was what we called a roundup email. So we would plug in newsworthy items and pass it around to whoever else from the team until we felt it was complete. So once we have all of this information gathered and together in one place, we go through a process of sorting these into the various buckets. So we have many different communication channels, as many of you are familiar with, from our large listserv to all of our supporters, to our e-newsletter, our coalition-specific listservs, all these different communication channels. So we need to make sure that all of that great content that we've brought together, that it's going to the most appropriate place. So we sort it all out. You know, like major news of national significance makes it in the weekly Wednesday Wire, whereas there might be really topic-specific information that is going to go to a constellation or a learning community, things like that. So that's sort of our process, and I think that sometimes it's helpful to kind of hear what other folks are doing so that you can figure out what pieces you want to take and what pieces you can redesign or make better for you. So moving into the next slide on launching your newsletter. With that in mind, remembering that it's simpler than you might think, some of the steps you want to consider at this point is now you you kind of have started to come up with a system, you're seeing the types of things you might want to include, but you need to really identify what is it that you want to accomplish with this newsletter. So is it that you want your leadership to be plugged into the latest news and updates? Is it something that you want to make sure that stakeholders all around are plugged in and, you know, everybody's connected to the work that's happening? Maybe it's just to talk about the events or activities or whatever your coalition is doing, but what your real objectives are going to shape the way you're going to want to build this. So the next thing to really think about is how you want your newsletter to be distributed and who the audience is. And these are really closely tied together. So many coalitions have email marketing service providers, stuff like MailChimp or Constant Contact that they use to send out their newsletters. Other organizations have fancy software that they can use, or it could be much more simple as just simply a listserv. So you're going to want to think about how big is your audience? Who are they? How are they going to sign up? What are the pieces that you want to put into place to make this an easier product? So you don't want to have to reinvent things every time. You want to build it once, and then you can just plug in content later. So if that's through an automated sign-up form or if that's through an existing email list, you'll kind of want to figure that out at this point. And then the next step is really identifying what's the right newsletter structure. So looking at all of these examples that you've pulled together, what makes the most sense to you, and really building your template. That I cannot emphasize enough how important it is. If you can just get your template how you want it in the beginning, it's much easier, because then it's just you're plugging stuff in, as opposed to trying to reformat and change this thing and, you know, this box size. You'll notice that the USBC has a very specific formula that we follow about the way that we put news items or action items or funding opportunities, that we list them. So it's nice to kind of figure that out according to your own style guide moving forward. And I think, Kenny, you mentioned that there was another question that came in, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
Well, I think there was something about internal as well, and Danae kind of referred to that in the community workspace, where she said that, you know, some of these forums and forums are for announcements to your own or for discussion forums. So I think it was wrapped up in the communication question. So we think we did cover that. Thank you, Cheryl.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that, you know, most of us subscribe to a lot of the coalition newsletters that go on, and we love it when we see how the newsletters lift up their local coalitions and local events and happenings as well. So that really engages your membership too, to see their own high activities and programs promoted, their events listed as well. So that's always been a really great practice with what state coalitions are doing with their newsletters. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to our next question. This is on fundraising, and it says, we stretch every coalition dollar to implement programs and activities. As a perennially cash-strapped organization, we would love ideas for fundraising, and also what are some legal considerations we need to keep in mind as we explicitly ask for donations. And for this, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Walls, our program and campaign coordinator. Take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Kinkini. Yeah, this is also a great question, and is pretty well timed too, because if you think about the season of spring and Mother's Day and Father's Day, there's a lot of really fun things that everyone can do to campaign around that and to get people excited about your coalition's work. To sort of go along our very intrinsic theme of not reinventing the wheel, I'm actually going to point to a webinar that we did in November that Cheryl, who you just heard from, and Lynette, who you'll hear from later, and myself did, where we talked about fast and furious ideas for fundraising for the holidays. All of the things that we talked about can easily be translated into not being related to the holiday season. And we also addressed the idea of soliciting donations regardless or with mind to your IRS tax-exempt status, what sort of fundraising platforms you can use based on whether or not you are tax-exempt or not, different legal considerations for acknowledgement, and within that we included some pretty robust resources how to create social media memes and make use of our photo library, where almost all the photos you see in any of our slideshows come from, different sort of direct donation appeals, and a couple of tools for local foundation outreach, which is something that I would definitely suggest because you do really amazing work in your communities, and local foundations are always looking for local solutions to give money to. And if you could go to the next slide, Kinkini, there are also two other previous Power Tool webinars that I wanted to highlight with this, which came from the Foundation Center that can help you with sort of the reaching out to foundations. One is just Grant Seeking Basics, which will cover the initial steps to grant seeking, different Foundation Center resources you can use. The other is Instructions to Proposal Writing, which is exactly what it says it is. The other key thing that I would mention is something that I talked about back in November on the call, but Cheryl reminded me of it in talking about subscribing to newsletters to make a newsletter, is that when I'm working on a campaign, the first place I start after sort of our brainstorm is to read the emails that come into my inbox and to like look at the different formats that people are using, look at the different content tricks that they're playing on me, and to really sort of like mimic or like borrow heavily from everyone else. So I would highly recommend that. Feel free to borrow from us. Feel free to borrow from anyone. And yeah, and we're always here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sarah.
Can I jump in and remind us of one other bit?
Please.
Hi, this is Megan. I just realized also that we want to highlight the Foundation Center directory subscription that we have. And so Danae and Kinkini can help plug folks in, but we do have a subscription to the big national directory of different foundations that the Foundation Center runs. And we have this not only for ourselves, but also to make available to all of you in the breastfeeding coalitions. Because there is just a one login, however, we just ask that you write in and check in with our coalition staff and let them know that you're ready and interested in using it, and they will get you set up. We aren't publishing the login on the website, but just send us a quick email to the coalition's address, and we can get you connected when you're at a point that you'd like to research foundations in your state or your community.
Thank you for that, Megan. Okay, moving on. Next question is on Backbone, the coalition admin support and infrastructure. As our coalition takes on more initiatives and raises its visibility, we are unable to sustain this work on the backs of volunteers alone. We would like to explore the possibility of a paid staff position to manage the administration of our coalition. What suggestions and support can you offer? And for this, I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Director, Amelia Pismine.
Great, thank you, Kinkini. This is Amelia, and I'm very excited about this webinar and the chance to bring the entire team forward and make it really clear how we're available to you. Looks like this is a repeat slide, Kinkini. Do you want to flip to the next one?
Sorry about that.
There we go. So the first consideration, I wanted to lift up within this question, the coalition was asking, how do we fund administration of the coalition? And I wanted to point out that it's absolutely helpful to have paid staff to do the basic communications and to provide the administrative role that keeps a coalition going. But in order to fund that person, we really want to think about what makes that interesting to a funder. Right, having someone to send out emails, having someone to send out schedulers, that's not necessarily compelling enough. So we think that if we shift the focus from individual people doing projects or individual people doing administrative tasks, we can start to build for funders a value proposition. When we think about coalitions as multi-sectoral organizations, bringing together many other entities in organizational capacities, coming together to do large-scale policy systems and environmental change work, then we're really elevating for the funder what the potential is of this coalition, what's the point. And so when we focus on bringing organizations together, then the staff roles of a coalition carries a significant value. If we look at the next slide, we've had a few different webinars within several different series that have talked about collective impact. So you can refer back to those. I want to highlight, as we've said in every other opportunity to speak with you about collective impact, you don't have to declare your collective impact organization, you don't have to name it, but you can borrow critical things from that approach. And in particular, this is an FSG article called Understanding the Value of Backbone Organizations in Collective Impact. We can make this link live or even share the article in the meeting materials from this webinar. But the point here is that a backbone organization is your role as a coalition. This is what you're doing. And the collective impact literature helps us find a way to talk about that. right? It's not just that someone's sending emails, they're serving as a communication hub. It's not just that they're promoting activity, it's that they're building public will. And once those organizations come together, the backbone organization of your coalition is guiding the vision, looking at the strategy, aligning activities between and amongst all of the organizations that are at that table, looking for a way to have shared measurement, even when you have very disparate types of organizations coming together. And then together, what are the high-level levers for change that are going to translate into good policy advocacy actions, and then how together can resources be mobilized to fund those efforts. So when the coalition comes together, then when all these organizations come together under the umbrella of a coalition, they need an entity to play this backbone role. And so that's where you really have intrinsic value when you're talking to a funder and you're making a pitch. It's about the convening and the support functions that you provide because you're there. And if someone wasn't there, then that collaborative work couldn't happen. And the policy systems and environmental change could be a missed opportunity in your community or in your state. So next slide. I wanted to really highlight the expertise that you have within the coalition body. There's many coalitions that have written roles and job descriptions, have examples of contractor salary ranges. These are just a few that are listed. If you have a coalition that has some of this that you could share, you can feel free to add that into the chat box here for this webinar. And on an ongoing basis, you can use the coalition discussion forum to share resources with one another. And lastly, I wanted to emphasize that at the USBC, we are not only thinking constantly about how to bring technical assistance and support to you, we're always thinking about funding. We know that if you have funded staff, it really changes the kind of infrastructure support and the heft and just the momentum that you're going to be able to build. So while this has not manifested yet, please know that we are thinking about the coalitions in every funding and policy conversation that we're having. We would really like to be able to see you all have funded capacity to exist, to be this backbone organization, not just to do one-off projects. So please know that we are your partners with this, and when any funding opportunities come along, if you'd like to have a further discussion about how to frame your pitch in collective impact terms, feel free to let me know and seek out assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia, and I couldn't agree more. So yes, please do know that we provide one-on-one support, group support for any of these. So do call on us for that.
We have one question for Amelia, and then a comment that I think will actually be a great bleed into the next section. But Amelia, can you just explain a little bit about what FSG is and maybe the Collective Impact Forum?
Yeah, so FSG is one of the thought-leading organizations that has first articulated collective impact principles. And the Collective Impact Forum is a place where collective impact organizations are coming together, kind of like our discussion groups and learning communities, where you can be interacting with other organizations that are on a similar journey and learning from them, sharing your materials, and we are all figuring out how to do this together, and FSG is one of the leaders in the United States for this. You've probably heard us speak a lot about TAMRAC, which is another leading thought leader within collective impact principle work, and USBC has done a lot of work and learning with TAMRAC that's Canadian-based as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And we can put in the links for both the Collective Impact Forum as well as the TAMRAC, so you could go and join their community groups. They have fabulous resources. on their sites.
And so just the comment that was shared that is a really good segue is actually just a suggestion that, you know, if there is another organization in your state that shares breastfeeding as part of their mission and goals, that they might facilitate a coordinator or provide, you know, infrastructure supports, a headquarters, fiscal sponsorship for your coalition. So turn it back to you, Kinkini, to intro the structural question.
Good comment. Thank you, Megan. So this is on structure. It says, as an MCH staff leader of my state territory health department, I'm the primary person managing the coalition. As our coalition engages larger number of stakeholders from across the Surgeon General sectors, there are doubts expressed about our coalition's autonomy and community focus. Members feel a coalition needs a governing body and bylaws and cannot be administered by a government employee. How do I clear up the concerns of my coalition members? And for this, I'm going to invite Megan to answer.
Wonderful. Yep. And this is a very common, very meaty one. But first, I wanted to just start by clearing up what sometimes we've heard as a misconception, that in USBC's, you know, guidelines or support for coalitions that we, you know, really have one particular structure that we are driving you towards. That is not true. You don't have to become an independent nonprofit organization in order to be your state and then to be recognized and registered with the USBC. I've actually posted here just the excerpts, not all of it, but the relevant excerpts from our coalition guidelines, and this is what the existing state coalitions sign on to when they join into our directory of the 50 state breastfeeding coalitions. And notice also that it says that the coalition should meet or be working towards meeting the following. So we also recognize that sometimes, you know, especially in earlier startup mode, not every coalition is going to be achieving every single guideline all at the start. And so the key pieces here are just that the leadership and the membership are really multi-sectoral. That's really the nature of being a coalition, is that you have that diversity in who you're bringing together, including the government, non-government, healthcare, consumer and parents, and so on. And then also, of course, that for the state and territorial coalitions, that you really are state and territorial wide, that you are operating with that scope of your entire state. And then the other one that's relevant here, there's a couple others about, you know, your mission is aligned with breastfeeding and so on, very obvious, but also that you have meetings, coalition meetings that are open and have diverse stakeholders that are engaged. So again, it's really about enacting your role as a coalition and really ensuring that you are functioning as a coalition. And this link here at the bottom goes to those guidelines. So you can see this doesn't say that you must be an independent organization or independently incorporated. So if you go to the next slide, Kinkini, I'll just chat a little bit, though, about some of the structural considerations that we hear about and think about. Whoops. So we have experienced, of course, many different structures that state and local breastfeeding coalitions have. There are many that are independent nonprofit organizations. Some of them also go on and get their tax-exempt status with the IRS. Some don't. You don't have to. That's a whole other conversation. But then there are others that are housed within another organization. They have a fiscal sponsor or a fiscal agent that is hosting them, sometimes even providing staff, as the previous commenter had shared. Oftentimes, the state coalitions are starting out within their state health department, and those are often, sometimes they have other names. Maybe they're called a task force or a committee when they're starting out inside the government agency. And those are all perfectly valid and reasonable structures to use. There might be others. If there's others, please chat them to us if I've skipped any major ones. But again, it's really about what is the unique need and the stage that your state or your territory community that you're serving is in, and what is most helpful for that place that you are serving. So a couple of things that we ask that folks might think about. One is, does your coalition want or need to be able to lobby? Do you need to have, are you lacking an independent voice? And typically in order to lobby, that has to be a non-governmental voice for legislation and policy change in your state. And, the answer to this can be yes or no. It really can, because depending on your state and what other state or local nonprofit organizations you might have active, what other partners you have in your space, you might have another nonprofit next door that is really having an aligned mission for the same types of policy goals that you have. And maybe they're doing the lion's share of the lobbying work, and you can partner with them, and that's okay. And so that could happen, but it also could be that you might notice that you really need this voice, or maybe something goes on with that organization. Maybe they merge with somebody else and their goals change, or maybe sometimes it could also happen that perhaps down the line a policy situation happens where you have a difference of opinion with that other organization. So, something to be watchful for, but in those instances sometimes you might find that you are lacking that independent voice, and that you do want and need for a coalition to be independent to provide that lobbying voice, that independent function. So that's one thing to think about. And there's a whole other conversation and webinar about that nonprofits can lobby. I know we've done some webinars on that in the past. So if that's a question mark for you, we can help direct you to different resources there. Piece I wanted to talk about, getting beyond just legislation and what does your state legislature do. We have all of these different groups within both the federal and the state government that are touching on breastfeeding or touching on maternal-child health or different aspects of the landscape that supports our families. And that's why, Action 20 of the Surgeon General's Call to Action specifically talks about two parts underneath it, one being the federal interagency work group and the other being USBC, and then, of course, all the state coalitions with us, that these are distinct bodies. And you can see I've listed under here, there's so many different groups, and this isn't even all of them, that are active both in the federal agency space as well as oftentimes at the state government level as well. So another question you might want to be thinking about, and again, it could be working all types of different ways in your state. You could have all sorts of different answers, and that's okay. But is breastfeeding included in all of the relevant areas of your state's public health agenda? And another corollary to that is where it is active, are the initiatives well coordinated across programs and funding streams? And I know I've heard from many states where it is, and you guys have really great examples of coordination within your state, and there's funding is going to different places, and they're working together and implementing and not duplicating efforts and coordinating well with the coalition. Other times, and I'll tell you, sometimes it happens on the federal level as well, where we are, even though we are a separate and distinct body and we are trying to support this type of coordination at the federal level, sometimes we're still scratching our heads of, does the right hand know what the left hand is doing in the federal government? So that can also happen, and where that lack of coordination might happen, there can be some value or some extra oomph in having a voice, independent voices that are able to put some pressure on your state leadership. Maybe you have a really great WIC director, but your state Title V director or your community chronic disease director is not supportive of breastfeeding. Whatever that is, you might think about your coalition as having a role in that encouragement of that coordination. So if you go to the next slide, Kenny, there's one other piece. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to also put in a plug for, if you're having some of those considerations, if you're thinking about, okay, everything's going great, we like our structure, that's great. Don't feel like you need to change it. But if and when you might contemplate a structural change for your coalition, wanted to point you to a couple of resources. First of all, the very, very first webinar session that we did in Power Tools was about nonprofit startups. So for those who are in a place of doing a separation into an independently incorporated entity. That webinar is a resource. And then also, when you're thinking about those changes, don't hesitate to contact us. And again, Kinkini and Danae and I are always willing to chat and think through, what are the steps or what are the considerations that are most relevant for you. So I'll double check the questions, or if any questions you see, Danae. Looks we just have a thank you for the thing. So okay, I think we can go on.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you, Megan. And moving on, our next question is on social media. And our coalition leader says, our coalition is interested in improving our visibility by ramping up our social media presence to build a larger network, to engage in advocacy, and to involve our community in support of our mission. What resources and tips on social media could you share to help us get started? And for this, I'm going to turn over to our PR and Communications Coordinator, Lynette Nicol.
Hi. So first, kind of what Sarah said about making sure not to reinvent the wheel. We did a webinar, kind of a Twitter 101 called Taking Twitter by Storm, where we talked about setting up an initial Twitter account. So I want to start by highlighting that webinar, which does a basic introduction to using Twitter, as well as let you know that we're going to be having another webinar. The May Powered Tools will be focused on social media advocacy, where we'll expand a little bit further outside of Twitter and explain how we can use some of the other social media platforms for advocacy, sort of thinking about the upcoming Mother's Day campaigns that your coalitions might want to take part in. But also, next slide, we have a really exciting announcement. We're going to be launching one-on-one Twitter trainings. Well, really, I can do other social media platforms as well, but really focusing on Twitter because Twitter is such a great tool for advocacy and the dissemination of news. So it's going to be interactive and personalized, and I'll be doing trainings where we're setting it up so we can do a beginner's Twitter, intermediate Twitter, advanced Twitter, Facebook for advocacy, and then a discussion about sometimes coalitions aren't sure which platforms to use. So really doing a deep dive about what are the pros and cons of each platform, with a focus on what is going to work for your individual coalition, for your individual personal needs, the individual personal needs of the person or people who are going to be using the social media platforms. And so we're going to send out an email with more information where you can sign up for a time slot. And I'm really excited to provide this service and to get to know members of the coalitions better, but also really do some deep troubleshooting, and so that we can help you set up your social media the way that we talked about setting up the newsletter, where it's something that's sustainable and effective and doesn't drive you crazy. Because, the big thing about social media is that you have to constantly be doing it, and that can be a daunting task when you're low on resources. So everything that I do will focus on how you can make it efficient and effective. So I'm very excited about that. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Lynette. And I just wanted to let you know that when we send that announcement out, do keep Lynette's email and contact information on your radar, because one of the things that she does so well is, besides doing the one-on-one trainings with you all, is that she is glad to lift up your stories through our social media, USBC social media too. So please be sharing your stories through either the Coalition Spotlight things or any other way, so that we can be highlighting your accomplishments and promoting it through our networks as well. Okay, moving on. This one is on risk management, and it says our coalition is concerned that we have not maintained records of our meeting agendas and maybe some other important documents. How do we reduce the risk to a nonprofit and or our tax exempt status? And I think I'm going to take a shot at this one. So we had in 2015, we had Melanie Harmon did a fabulous Power Tool session on top 10 legal lists, checklist for nonprofit, and you could see she had a ton of resources, and also how do you correct yourself and how do you preemptively prevent some of these snafus from happening. So I also wanted to say that if you go to our Coalition Learning Connection, you'll find that there's a Coalition's benefit section, and as you have affiliate membership with the nonprofit center, so please, risks management center, so please go ahead and check that out. Click on our CLC and see how you can check in. But besides that, who would have thought that financial management could have like such fabulous and stimulating resources? So go to the Risk e-news that they have. They have a wonderful library. They are also providing at a very inexpensive rate, a kind of risk management plan for our affiliate members. That's you. So go ahead and make use of that. Have them do a custom one for you. And then also, I can't say more about the Risk Management Essentials newsletter that they do. I think it's a monthly, and it's packed with great resources, not just on risk, but just so many other good articles on nonprofits, what are the upcoming trends, what are things to keep in mind. So I hope you will check in and subscribe to these. These are fabulous. Okay, moving on to our next question. It's our coalition is in process of amending our bylaws, and we need help in writing a bylaw relating to giving contributions to various community causes. I feel we need some guidelines to help us with our decision-making process. And for this, I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Great. I think this is my last one, so I'll try to run through pretty quickly, but have a couple of great tidbits embedded in this question as well. The first one, though, is that I want to just highlight the question of where do you put, a specific governing protocol in terms of which of your governing documents does it go in. And this little triangle actually is back from that first webinar in the Power Tools series where we talked about your governing documents. And so I wanted to just first highlight that there's this hierarchy in terms of our nonprofit governing documents, where the very top of the hierarchy is state law. And it's one of the banes of our existence is that every state's law is a little bit different, and so that we can't always just give you the one template for your bylaws that fits, because we have to make sure that you do align with the requirements of your state's nonprofit law. So for the first space we look is the nonprofit law. The second in the hierarchy is your articles of incorporation. That would be, again, this is if you are an entity that has officially incorporated as an independent organization in your state. You would do that by filing articles of incorporation with your state. Usually it's with the Secretary of State and a corporations division, something like that. So that comes next. Then your bylaws, which is really like your constitution for your organization, and then below that are the policies and procedures. And the thing that I want you to retain about this little hierarchy is that if there is ever a difference between these documents, if you say in your bylaws that you're going to handle, member representation in one way, and then you say in a policy later that you're going to handle it another way, the thing that is higher up on the hierarchy prevails. And then so similarly, if you were to say, in your bylaws that your board could have an emergency meeting with only 2 hours of notice, but your state nonprofit law actually requires that any nonprofit boards have to have at least 3 days of notice before having a special meeting. Oh, well, oops, then your state law prevails. And if you were to do something different, you would be breaking your state law. So just to know that whenever there is not consistency between these different layers or different rungs, that the higher rung prevails. And so that also leads us to the question of making sure that you don't duplicate content between them as much as possible, because that's one way that you can create conflict between the rungs. And if you go to the next slide, King Kenny, I'm just going to chat just a little bit about the this other piece about how much detail you put. So the first bit is just to be sure to really read your state law section and what your nonprofit articles and bylaws must include. And then we really recommend don't put any more detail in either articles or bylaws than is absolutely required by your state law. And that's because that way you can avoid having these conflicts. The other reason for not having any more detail in your bylaws than you really need is that when you have to change that detail in your bylaws, you typically have to go through a full membership vote. For articles and bylaws amendments, you usually have to have a vote of your full membership. And then for articles amendments, you also have to pay fees to your state, because you can't just have the vote. You also have to send back to your state, hey, we've changed our articles. So just a couple of things to think about. And so that way you can really do only as much detail as you have to have, and then do the rest of your governing decision-making and protocols and whatever you need to have. Do that with policies, or what we call at USBC, we call them policies and procedures. So all that to say, for the questioner who's asking about giving contributions to community causes, I would not recommend your bylaws. I would recommend that be a policy. That is not something that is typically required to be in bylaws. That's really at the level of your day-to-day budget and financial management types of decisions, and you wouldn't want to have that in your bylaws. You would probably want that to be a policy and procedure. So if you, all that to say, if you go to the next slide, let's actually get into the meat of the question about policies. So these can typically be amended by the board vote or a full membership vote, and different organizations with different structures can make different decisions here about how they want to do this. But again, because we are all coalitions, we oftentimes will have a different level of engagement that we want to have with our membership, because we're bringing together all different types of organizations to work together, and they might have a higher level of interest in some of the policies. So one way that you might look at this is differentiating the approval procedures based upon the content. What is this policy about? And so one thing we could do is, if a policy affects just your board functioning, and for this example about budget, financial management, hiring the CEO, there are certain things that are board roles, that those things could be board approval only. But if the policy affects your whole membership, so for example, how many member representatives you can have from an organization, those policies you might want to have your full membership do have the approval process, or at least seek feedback from them on any new policies or changes to existing ones. Make sure that they're engaged in the process about those policies that are going to impact them. And their connection to your coalition. And then similarly, if a policy affects a specific committee, maybe it's your advocacy committee, your fundraising committee, whatever it is, you might want to seek the feedback of that committee, but then typically have the board approve. And that's because committees usually are functioning underneath the oversight of the board. The board has the fiduciary responsibility over the activities of the committee in most cases. So if you go to the last slide for this section here, King Kenny, so getting back to the donation question, so this questioner was talking about having a bylaw about giving contributions to community causes. And so gone around the block to say, I really think that should be a policy. But then in terms of donations policies, I have to say, we actually don't have a policy about this at USBC. We do have a policy and procedure for incoming donations and how we handle incoming funds. funds. And I have a link here that our USBC policy library is publicly available via our Coalition's Learning Connection, or the CLC. And so you can always see and read the most current versions of any of the USBC policies and procedures there, so please do check that out. But unfortunately, we don't have an example for this one because we've never had budgeted funds for outgoing donations. We just have the incoming version. So I thought through a few considerations about this. I also looked for an example in the board source policy sampler, and I didn't find one readily. But if we do find one, we will certainly bring that sample back to the questioner. But a couple of considerations I thought of. One is really that, this question of how do we handle decisions of donating to other causes, other organizations in our community, that's really an expense decision. So it really should fall underneath, or at least be aligned with, your bigger budget policy, your financial management policies. And again, we have a USBC example of this, so please feel free to steal shamelessly from that financial management policy that we have. Another consideration is that you want to make sure that the donation is consistent with your organization's mission and values, and you might have some questions that you have your board consider when they're having discussions about which causes to donate to around that alignment. And then another piece you might want to consider is that decision process open and transparent. So let's say, for example, that you decide that every year you're going to have in your budget a line for this type of donations, outgoing donations, and then in 2017 you said that you budgeted $250 to that line. So your board passed a budget, and you have $250 to disperse in 2017. Okay, so now how do you go about considering options for that? Do you send out an email or have an open call to your membership to suggest causes that you might donate to? How do you make sure that that process is open and transparent, and make sure that it's not viewed as oh, there was a pet organization of one of the board members and they decided to give them the money and we didn't even know about it. You want to avoid that sort of thing, of course. But open it up to your membership for suggestions, have an application process. What are some ways that you could do that with your coalition's structure and process? And then your board might have a set of examples that they could consider and allocate that $250 accordingly. So those are a few considerations that I could think of. Certainly you all might have more and better ideas, and you all also might have examples of this type of policy. And so if you do, we invite you to chat to us, put it up in the question, or email us, and we'd gladly share it. I think that's it for that one. I'll just check the question box here.
Thanks, Megan. I'm checking the chat too. Are there any?
Let's see. We have a
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Let's see. The commenter says that a great resource that they found in their state was that universities have free legal clinics for small businesses and nonprofits that will help you make sure your bylaws are conforming to state law. And they found their assistance very helpful. And yes, that is a great suggestion. So those types of resources often can exist for small nonprofits.
Wonderful. Okay, gosh, we're coming to the end of our time, and this question is on leadership. It says, our coalition wants to build a forward-looking board with intention, leadership with the capacity to collaborate productively in a multi-sector entity such as ours and adapt to a networked way of functioning. What suggestions do you have? And I'm going to take that one and again point to one of our own Power Tools webinars. So in July 2015, we did a board basics called the Best Practices for Governance and Nominating. And in that session, we, our speakers, Megan, Renner, and Brenda Bandy and Robin Stanton talked about how USBC itself had, refocused its governance and nominating committees and what we did. So there was a lot of great information about to build a really strong, robust board. How do you need to do some kind of self-assessment process that informs your priorities? How do you use, a profile tool that informs the nominating process? How do you look at what skill sets you have on your board and where the gaps are, what needs to be what needs to be filled. And also this session looked at the board source resources. So again, as coalitions, you have the affiliate membership with board source, and I hope you use it freely because their resources are phenomenal, and you have so many good resources on there. And I'm reminded of this quote that the film director Francis Ford Coppola said when they asked, what's the difference between a good movie and a bad movie? And he said that in a good movie, everybody is making the same movie. So that kind of, really relates to a coalition too, because it's an organization of organization. The leadership here really is convening the group and coalescing around a shared mission. So often you have coalitions where the chair or the president thinks that they have a greater voice in it, and the leadership team, you're just one of those, and the basic premise of a coalition is to come together and work on projects, build your capacity based on your capacity and aligned with what's needed for the field. Another great session that we did was in the Collective Impact series. It was about collaborative governance and adaptive leadership. Again, you need a different kind of leadership mindset to be doing this. So please check this one out too. This one had very good resources on what the whole leadership skills can be built. You don't have to have inherent qualities to do that. And this session had great resources on how you can build that collaborative governance and adaptive leadership skill sets within your leadership group as well. A third one that I have listed here is the leadership learning community, which is looking at all the different kinds of leadership trainings that nonprofits invest in. Most nonprofit folks, including coalitions, do a lot of, and one of the core things is that it has to be grounded in racial equity, which is a leadership competency for the work that we do in the social sector. Unless any of our professional leadership development is guided by principles of equity and inclusion, we will never be able to bring our coalition's full potential to its fruition. So that's really important. Again, another one which, an article from the Stanford Social Innovation Review that we like very much is the mindset, and this is about, the and or. It's, this one was again on our learning connection, and it describes how leaders are integrating the network and organizational mindset into their pursuit of social impact. So the article is called Living in the World of Both and. So make use of your board source affiliate membership. They now have a discussion forum too, where you can ask questions and get answers from your peers. So that's an added resource that has just begun. In terms of what we have, in 2014, California Breastfeeding Coalition did a whole session at the National Breastfeeding Conference called Growing Our Own Leaders with Intention and Attention. Phenomenal. This coalition has really focused on how to build relationships first, connection before content, and that's why they have such a high-functioning leadership team and a coalition base that's able to do so much. So we will be happy to have Dr. Navarro and Robbie Gonzalez-Dow from presenting on one of our coalitions, but check out their presentation from our archives as well. So again, many coalitions doing great work here on building their leadership. We've had, Ohio that restructured and did that with intention. We have BCW, which is the Breastfeeding Coalition of Washington, which has been featured in our first issue of the coalition spotlight. Now, Washington was different because they've had a coalition for over 20 years, and they are a high-functioning coalition, high-functioning state with high NPINC rates and doing a lot of work. And even then, they looked at how could they change their coalition to meet not just the current changing landscape of breastfeeding, but also look at the future trends, and they've completely reshaped their mission, their vision, and what their whole purpose is based, embedded in equity. So do read that article and find. So we have in the racial equity webinar series, I haven't included it here, Juana Bordas did a session on the power of we, again, deep community engagement, deep levels of inclusion, and how to build your base, how to build your tribe, how to build your coalition leadership to engage and make, use of your members' time, precious time that they give to the coalition in the most productive and impactful way possible. So I think, are there any questions, Megan, that you see?
Not any new questions yet, but we're happy to take any others, even on topics that we didn't cover. Thanks to the team for collecting such a good, broad swath of questions, and to all of you who submitted.
Like I said, in the top 10 legal checklist, Melanie covered a lot of other coalition operations issues like conflict on the board, careless contracting. If you have sub-grantees that's doing work and you haven't done your contract well, how do you do that? Social media snafus. So do all of the past sessions that we've listed here, and we had a few more that we're going to make sure that we embed in the resource section of this. Be sure to check those out too.
Yeah, well, and maybe I'll just do a quick plug. I know we had another questioner that we responded to in the chat, but just to highlight that if you have not joined recently to one of the 222 webinars, the CDC USBC ones that we host on the second Tuesday of the even-numbered months, you might remember in the past that we had done regional networking calls after those, and we went on a bit of a hiatus with that for a while, and now we have reinstituted the networking calls, but with a little bit of a different convening process. So we've tried out a couple of different ways, but what we're doing now is we have everyone can register for the post-webinar discussions that we are doing on a platform that allows us to break out into subgroups dynamically in the moment, and for you all to choose and decide and to vote each time on how you'd like to break out. And so the last time we tried this with breaking out along different topics, different subtopics underneath the overall theme of donor human milk that the presenters had shared about that time. And so we will be trying that again on the webinar coming up. Is it April 11th?
Yes.
The second Tuesday of April?
It is April 11th.
It is the 11th, yes. Yep. So we hope you'll join us for that. And again, the registration for the post-webinar discussions will be shared with the same information as for the webinar itself. So you can get both of the registration links in the same spot.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. And I guess, do we, we have 1 minute remaining. Is there any last comment or question that's come up?
Yeah, there actually is one question. It says, any recommendations for getting medical professionals more involved with our coalition? Ours is predominantly WIC, which really hinders us when it comes to lobbying.
Oh, sorry, ladies, I choked on my own water before you asked that question. Yeah, well, and I'm curious if Amelia or Kinkenny have suggestions too, or others who are working with state-level coalitions. A couple of thoughts. One is that oftentimes connecting with the state-level organization can help. So I don't know if that's already a connection that your coalition has with your state chapter of AAP. or whatever are the different state affiliates in your state. They might be able to help, and their staff people for the chapter might have different vehicles or venues where they can share information about your lobbying activities and recruit people that way. One of our audience members has said, just go and ask them. So that's a great suggestion as well. We have a comment to contact the medical professional organizations. Yep, so AAP and ACOG, local chapters, AMA, AAFP, and so on. So those are some great ideas. Yeah, it's interesting. I've often wondered this too, because we even at the national level have usually less excitement about lobbying from the healthcare provider folks. And I wonder if there's any particular feedback about why that is. But one of the hang-ups might just be that people often haven't had a lot of experience with it, and so sometimes some of the confidence building and the practice sessions that you can offer, in terms of having conversations with legislators, maybe ask them what are their barriers or what are their needs around doing lobbying, and you might learn a little bit more about what would help. I don't know, any other thoughts from the team on that one?
Yeah, this is Kinkini. Go ahead, Amelia.
Oh, go ahead, Kinkini. I'll chime in after you.
Okay, so yeah, we often finding that one champion or an early adopter is really helpful, because often physicians and docs are super busy in their practice, if it's either with the hospital or with private practice, that they might not attend meetings if they're during the daytime as often as others are able to do. But finding that one champion, your AAP chapter, state AAP chapter, is a great way to get it. If you have hospitals working on maternity care practices, that's a good way to do it. A state like California has something called regional breastfeeding liaisons in their WIC program, where there are dedicated staff in WIC that connect with healthcare providers to build that continuity of care between their prenatal, postpartum, and the hospital piece and the prenatal piece. So that has really helped build great bridges between the healthcare provider and the WIC communities and strengthen their coalitions as well. So those are some ways to do, but I would be, again, we are dot connectors here at USBC, so I would send me an email if you can, and I will definitely connect you with some of the other coalitions that are doing this and have strategies that have worked. Amelia?
Yeah, that sounds great. This is Amelia. I think all I would add to that is, yes, ask them, but make the ask really specific. As Kinkini said, medical professionals are extremely busy, and as Megan said, many of them may not have had much experience with lobbying. So if you can reach out with something that is specific, that you know through different means is going to be personally and professionally meaningful to them, you can say, this is specifically what we'd like you to do, and here's the support that we can provide you in order to do it. So whether that's helping queue up testimony, going with them on that day, or any practice in advance, so that you make it as discreet a piece as you possibly can, and support it as much as possible, so that you really help deliver them exactly to the place that they need to go at the right time, and make it as easy as possible. But I love what Kinkini just shared too about much larger infrastructure that already exists in order to smooth the way for that.
Thanks, Amelia. And with that, we are out of time, and thank you everybody, and thank you USBC team for taking on these questions, and to our audience for being with us today. Thanks for all you do. Know that these questions, you can keep them coming to the coalition's inbox, and we will do our best to connect with you one-on-one, or do plan another webinar to answer your questions. So thanks for all you do. And our next Power Tools webinar is going to be on social media, so I hope you will join us. Until then, goodbye.